All right, Shannon Fentiman, welcome to the Resolution Room. Great to have you on board.
Hello, Damien. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted.
Well, listen, you've obviously had a high media profile, but is it fair to say that this is a high watermark of your media exposure being on the Resolution Room?
Absolutely. And look, these days, Damien, in opposition, I say yes to whoever asks. So I'm very happy to be here.
It's all downhill from here, but it's great to have you on. So I really appreciate it. We're old friends, of course. Let me do you by way of introduction. You'll tell me if I get any of this wrong. A lawyer before you entered Parliament at Waterford in 2015, went straight to a ministerial position, quite an extraordinary victory that those who remember Queensland politics. You've been more recently Attorney-General in the Palaszczuk Miles government, then you're the Minister for Health, and now you're the Shadow Treasurer. Have I summed it up well, Shannon? I've probably missed a couple of portfolios. The portfolios are longer these days.
That's right. No, I was small business training and skills employment there well for a bit. But yes, that's a good summary. It was a very big 10 years being a minister in Queensland.
Yeah, I'm sure it was, and I want to talk a bit about the transition from that to, obviously, opposition in terms of the winner takes it all approach in government. But the other thing I want to touch upon is your overachievement. I mean, why do you have a master's in law? What's that about? Is that just overachieving?
No, I actually really like learning. And the wonderful thing about politics in this job too, you're always learning. But I always liked studying, and I only did a law degree. I didn't do a double degree. And so I really did want to learn more, and I loved studying law. And at that time I was working as a young employment lawyer, and I did a lot of subjects specialising in labour relations law and employment law. And I think it also helped me be a better lawyer, to be honest. So
yeah. Well, I want to touch a bit on that.
And I took my time doing it. Don't worry, Damien. I took my time doing it. Yeah, I think my master's took me about 8 years.
Oh my God, really? You did take your time. So before you entered Parliament, you were an associate to Justice Atkinson. Then you worked at Hall Payne as an employment lawyer. And obviously a lot of people that listen to this for their sins are lawyers, so I'm fortunate in that space. So how has the law and being a lawyer shaped your attitude to negotiation and leadership? Has it been a useful background to bring to a political role?
It's been incredibly useful. I mean, there's all the technical bits, like studying law really trains your brain to think analytically, to think about solving problems. But the practice of law, particularly as an employment lawyer, you're often sitting down and meeting people at their most vulnerable. They may have been dismissed from their job, they may have been injured at work, they may have been discriminated against. And so it really taught me so much about sitting and listening with people in that, uncomfortable space and really allowing them to be heard. And as you know, the job of a politician, so often with constituents or key stakeholders, is that same skill to really enable people to feel comfortable to tell their story. So I think the practice of being a lawyer in particular and meeting with clients really stood me in very good stead for my career in politics.
It's funny you should say that. I've been reflecting. I've been a year and a bit as a mediator, and before that I was an insurance lawyer, but now I'm in rooms with a lot of injured people and their legal reps. And yeah, it's been, obviously in my early part of my career I did criminal law, dealing with a lot of disadvantaged and vulnerable people, but it's been really interesting for me to switch back and step away from something I've done for a long time and see the world through their lens, and how intimidating it can be sitting around a boardroom, and even with a mediator like me that's probably not as intimidating as others, But it's been really interesting for me to sort of get back into that space and see the world through their lens.
It's a real skill, and I think it takes a lot of empathy, which, I think is a real skill, a real leadership skill. And I think more and more of our leaders need empathy. And, being able to sit with people and really listen to their story and show them that you understand and have that compassion, and then sort of move from that into talking, logically about the steps you can do to improve a system or help them achieve justice. It is a real skill. And I think my work, even whilst I was studying law, volunteering at Women's Legal Service, Centre Against Sexual Violence, all of that work I did supporting vulnerable women in the community also stood me in good stead for those difficult conversations.
Yeah. I'm at the moment doing an accreditation course to become a coach. It's a largely unregulated field compared with, say, other services. And it's really struck me the crossover in skill sets between mediation and coaching. And it's effectively that, the game of empathy and listening, because in coaching, of course, you're holding space and it's the client who's bringing a problem or a goal that you're working with them on. So it's actually really struck me as interesting, that crossover. But I want to talk about the AG position, because a lot of lawyers who listen to this perhaps have a level of fantasy that one day I could get my hands on that role. You know, what good could I do? How could I shape law and justice? And of course, you had the privilege of it for, was it about 3 years or thereabouts in Queensland?
About 2.5 years.
Two and a half years. So a couple of things. Was it much different than you expected, having sort of seen the law close up? And what are you most proud about in terms of your AG role?
It was a little bit different. It was my dream job. Like, as you say, every lawyer wishes they could, become AG and, do great reform. So I went into it knowing that I had to work incredibly hard to get the reform done that I wanted to do. So I was pretty single-minded about what I wanted to achieve. But I think the other thing is, as AG, there are so many statutes that we have that are really old and need updating. And so every stakeholder that you meet wants their piece of legislation changed. And I can't see a problem and not want to solve it. So the biggest challenge was sticking to the key things you actually wanted to achieve. Otherwise, you just, we should also look at this, and this doesn't seem right. We should do this. And you've only got a small policy team in the Department of Justice and Attorney-General, and they work incredibly hard. If you think about every department, that justice policy legal team need to advise on every piece of legislation going before the Parliament. So if you want to drive reform, you have to be really disciplined. And I was not as good at that as I wish I had been, but it was really important. Like, you can only really get a few key big reforms done in a term. So I think the thing I'm most proud of was establishing the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force that was led by Margaret McMurdo, and they looked at how best to criminalise coercive control. But they also looked at the entire justice system and how we could rebalance it to really put victims at the centre. And so they also made recommendations that were quite controversial for the criminal lawyers, and hello to all the criminal lawyers that are listening, but things like changing the rules around consent and mistake of fact. They also recommended changes that we implemented around being able to name perpetrators of rape and sexual assault before committal, which is the only charges where you couldn't name a perpetrator. So all of those, or an accused, I should say. So all of those changes were not without controversy for, I think lawyers tend to be fairly risk averse.
Of course.
We like tradition, and sometimes embracing change is not our natural state of being. So it was a big reform piece, and it's the thing I'm most proud of.
It's a big reform, but the criminal justice system did need updating to reflect modern social values, don't they, and our perspectives, and the particular around family and domestic violence. So that, well done. And that's a great achievement in itself, Shannon. And it reminds me when you spoke about the work of Michael Porter, who says strategy is as much about what you don't do.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting, isn't it, how a person like you were drawn in all sorts of directions as someone who'd, by that stage, you'd been in Parliament, for about 5 years or thereabouts, I think. But still, it's, fairly early in that career, and you see all this stuff you want to do, and it all, no doubt everyone's quite compelling in front of you as a stakeholder for their case.
Absolutely. And, for years I'd been on policy committees within the Labor Party at state conferences, moving motions about, all sorts of law reform and a progressive sort of social agenda. And then I finally was in the spot to do it. So, I did work incredibly hard to get as much reform done as I could, and I'm quite proud of everything that we did in that space. And there's still a lot more work to do and a lot more reform that needs to happen. But I think we really did kickstart that conversation around the criminal justice system and reform.
That's fantastic. It reminds me also of Steve Jobs, who talked about the importance between signal and noise. You know, a lot of noise, and when you're busy as a leader, you must get a lot of noise. But the signal is more about effectively the key priorities, and you really sort of honed in on that as a key priority.
And I think the other thing is when you're in those positions, obviously crises or things develop that you have to respond to. So you can have your own proactive agenda, and these are all the things I want to do. But then, you know, for example, the casino inquiries kind of blew up in New South Wales and Victoria, and so then, you know, we had to have an inquiry into the casino here, and you know, we had to find a retired judge, and Bob Goddison led that review. So there's things that sort of happen, which you've got no control over, that you have to spend time and political capital on to manage.
You didn't see that one coming, but you've got to be responsive and meet the moment effectively.
Yeah, absolutely you do. Yeah.
Let's go back then. So, and to cover off on lawyers wanting to be Attorney-General, I'm glad I couldn't do it. I don't think I could manage the late nights. So good on you for taking...
It's not even the late nights, it's the paperwork. In no other portfolio is there so much paperwork, so many briefs, every sort of mental health court application. Like you have no idea the paperwork. We used to just like have suitcases of paperwork to carry home.
I do have some recollection of paperwork, but it must be intense, hey? Particularly in such a legally dense space, you know, the volume of paperwork. So before we go into what's it like to be in opposition and the winner takes it all, if we go back in time to a younger Shannon Fentiman, what were the early mentors and factors that have shaped your attitude towards public service? So why do you find yourself where you're at?
I was very lucky to grow up in a family of incredibly strong women. So obviously my mum was a teacher, and I think instilled those values in me about everyone deserving a first-class education, no matter where you live or how much money you have. And she's one of 4 sisters. One of her sisters, when I was growing up, was a lawyer. She was one of the first female partners at a law firm on the Gold Coast. So I saw, you know, what my mum was doing and my auntie was doing. My dad was a carpenter, so I think he really instilled in me the value of hard work and fairness at work. Like I remember him coming home. He had injured himself at work. Like we had all those sort of discussions, which, you know, I think obviously shaped me into a legal career which focused on employment law. So I had all of these really strong women, you know, obviously in lots of different service roles. And then, as you mentioned, I was lucky enough to be an associate to Justice Atkinson in the Supreme Court, and she was an incredible mentor and gave everything really to public service. And I still remember to this day the job interview that I had with her. It was by far the scariest job interview I've ever had to do.
I can imagine. She could be quite scary.
Well, and everyone had sort of said to me when applying for associate roles, like usually the judge would just want to have you into chambers and have a cup of tea and just see whether they could get along with you. You know, they've got your CV, they've got your marks that you got at uni and all the things you got involved in. But of course, Justice Atkinson was different. She had a clipboard of like 20 questions. And the first question was, what area of law do you think requires the most reform and why?
Wow.
Because at that time she was the head of the Law Reform Commission as well. Anyway, I somehow got through it and I got the job and I learnt so much. And she was just one of those mentors that really pushed you to be ambitious, which I think is really important for young women and young women in the law.
Yeah.
She asked me at one point what I wanted to do with my career. And at that stage I wanted to go to the bar. And she just looked at me and she sort of frowned and she was like, well, why don't you want to be a high court judge? I was like, I'm like 21. I didn't think I could say aloud that I would like to be a high court judge. So she was that kind of mentor. So I think she had a big influence on me just putting my hand up for opportunities when they came along.
That's remarkable. And you, of course, had no preparation that these questions were going to be asked. You thought you were going to have a nice cup of tea and talk about your academic qualifications, and all of a sudden you're put on the spot about areas of law reform in Australia. Yeah. So that's well done for getting the job,
Thanks.
Can I say?
I know. I literally walked out just completely like I had no idea. You know those moments where you don't actually remember, like you don't actually know what you're saying. You're saying something and you have this kind of
Yeah.
out-of-body experience, and
Yeah.
somehow you survived it anyway.
Well, that's fantastic. So let's go now to negotiation, because it's a passion of mine, and I teach a bit in the area. And you're obviously always in that space. You're negotiating with, caucus colleagues, stakeholders, constituents, and I've seen it close up. You're very good in politics. You learn very acutely to look really at what the core interests are that underlie various positions. In a way, I think that, for example, lawyers sometimes are a bit more challenged to do, but politics really does teach that skill set of really having a clear sense of where people are coming from and why, and to have a broader perspective of the landscape. Is that a fair comment, do you think, about a political skill set?
I think so. I think particularly if you're interested in big reform, then you have to develop the skills to bring people together, and find communities of interest. So find unusual allies that can be spokespersons for your cause, because obviously in the community, if you're trying to bring people along a journey around a policy shift or a reform, just having politicians talk about it is sometimes not all that convincing. But if you can find key stakeholders who work in NGOs, or, church leaders or sports professionals, people that have a profile that people are prepared to listen to, God, it makes it easier to get your reform through. So I think politicians are very good at finding those communities of interest and bringing people together and finding unusual allies.
Yeah, finding unusual allies and surveying the landscape really holistically to see what you can pull together from it, and really being alive to the reality that reform, as much as you can be a spokesperson for reform, you need lots of allies with you from various or often disparate areas of the community that you can weave together.
And stories, I think, are so powerful. If you can find people who can tell their story, it makes it so much easier. So obviously coercive control, as an example, it was quite controversial at the time. There's only a handful of countries in the world that had criminalised coercive control. But having Hannah Clark's parents, Sue and Lloyd, be prepared to tell their story really, I think, made it so much easier to navigate a very complex criminal law reform piece. So I think finding storytellers is also a really important part of that process.
That's so true. And on that point, I was at an event with Jackie at Souths Rugby League, and Lloyd played for Souths. And so he was up talking, and I just thought it was really, on that point, he was a working class guy from Souths in league circles, and he got a standing ovation, of course, and everyone. So you were able to he was able to bring a lot of men.
Yes.
With him in a very powerful way. It's something, I remember, obviously you'd never forget someone who's lost their daughter like that.
I know.
When they're courageous enough to speak. But the fact that he was so courageous to go around to his former club and was so well accepted, I thought that was quite remarkable. So it's funny how we both have a story about that and you were much more involved in, but it made an impression on me for obvious reasons.
Yeah, and I think people admired, their courage to share their story, and it really, I think, helped the community understand what we were trying to do.
So talk us through, in terms of negotiation that you're particularly proud of, have you got a war story for me, Shannon? Is something that springs out to mind for you?
I think voluntary assisted dying would have had to have been one of the hardest pieces of law reform that I helped navigate through the Parliament, because it's so emotive, and you have a lot of different stakeholders involved. So you have the families who have been advocating on behalf of their loved ones to have access to this medical procedure. You have church and faith groups who have very strong views on this. And then you have clinicians who are the ones who will have to perform this medical procedure. And then you have clinicians who may have a conscientious objection. And so, and then obviously being a political party, we also had key stakeholders in the Labor Party who had been fighting for this reform for many years. So it was a very difficult negotiation. It was really helped by the fact that the Law Reform Commission had done a wonderful piece of work over 12 months and had really distilled all the issues for us. But it still didn't really make the negotiation over the drafting of the legislation any easier. And I think when you are in those situations, not obviously everyone will not be happy, but I think as long as people feel heard and understood, if people can understand that as the decision maker, I understand where they're coming from and their concerns and can address that as best I can. I mean, that's really all you can do. But that is so important, because if people don't feel like they've been understood or they don't feel heard, then the process really goes off the rails very quickly, as I'm sure you know.
There's a school of thought in negotiation that when you're struggling with something between various parties, you might have that objective standard, you might commission another report, or so you had that obviously, which really helps because it sort of gets people thinking, say in church groups, well, there's a secular body here with expertise that has expressed a view, and maybe, as you say, with something like church groups, they realise that potentially they might have a very strong view of this world in terms of their values, but there's also secular forces at play and there's a clinical view, and sort of get them to paint the picture of the complexity of it. So that's really interesting. And I guess the other thing that jumps out at me in that story is the ability to ensure that even if you don't make people happy, you never will, that they feel heard in a process, and the importance of that. And I've seen that play out a lot in negotiations. People come in really hot about a point of view, and then if they feel that they've been heard or advocated for, you would think that the money, which is really what they're there to talk about, would be kind of top of mind. But often you can feel the collective sigh of relief. It's like, okay, well, I feel heard, I feel emotionally like I've been listened to and held, and let's now talk about and so you feel like you can more easily engage, if you like, the prefrontal cortex to the problem solving that you have to do.
Absolutely. That's why I think that empathy is so important up front, because you can't actually get to the rational problem solving bit, I think, until you've dealt with that. And this isn't an example of a negotiation, but one of the jobs you have to do as the attorney is make a decision about whether or not you're going to appeal. You'll get advice from the DPP about whether there's prospects for success, and obviously having tough conversations with family members about why you wouldn't be appealing a sentence in a particular matter is a really tough conversation. And I had many of them. And again, just being able to listen and really understand where the family member was coming from, and to have that conversation first before then getting to what the legal advice, may or may not say, was really the only way you could have those conversations.
Yeah, so you're firstly giving them the time of day to make sure that they feel heard and seen, and then it's like, well, this is the reality of the legal system that we're working with, guys. This is why putting on my hat as a chief law officer in Parliament, this is why legally the system says no, sort of thing, or whatever it is. But it's interesting. Let's talk a bit more about empathy. You made the point about it being perhaps absent at times from the political landscape in more recent times. And that could be a scope for a whole series of podcasts on the international scene at the moment. In what respect has your view on empathy changed, if at all, since you've been close and personal and you, in terms of your own leadership story?
I think I've been really lucky, as I talked about, because I did all of that work in the community before getting into Parliament and sitting with victims of sexual assault, or I was the duty solicitor at the Beanley Neighbourhood Centre for a number of years. Like I kind of had that experience. So I think I'm lucky in a sense that I think that empathy comes naturally to me. But I think what I've learned along my journey is how important it is, even when you're not sitting one-on-one with someone, even when you're at like a press conference or standing in the chamber in Parliament, displaying that empathy is so important. Like people need to see that. They need to see you, as a public figure and as a leader, someone who has compassion and kindness, as well as being a strong leader who gets things done. Like I think more and more, and you sort of mentioned the global scene at the moment and some of the leaders, unfortunately, that we have. I think it's more important than ever for leaders to display kindness and empathy and compassion, because how can we expect that, of members of our community if we're not leading the way? So I think it is more important than ever.
Yeah, you set the tone, huh? Okay, well, speaking of another topic, difficult people. Have you ever dealt with them, Shannon?
Often. Damien, you'll be surprised to hear.
Imagine that. What's your strategy? Have you gone about it?
I just try and de-escalate. Kill them with kindness. It's just, no, I'm here listening. I want to hear your story. It is amazing how being calm, being open, just listening, it really does take the heat out of it. And I've had to, not so much difficult people, but I've sat down with a lot of people who've been through really difficult, awful experiences.
Traumatised people, yeah.
Right. So whether that's through the child safety system, our justice system, or more recently as the health minister, people who have had not a good experience in our health system, and that being able to de-escalate the anger and get to, the emotions underneath it and be able to respond to that and meet them on that level before getting into, well, here's where we go from here and here's where you can review this matter and all of those process type things. If you rush into that, it's not going to be a pleasant conversation for anyone.
It's the same in the mediation space, don't rush through the empathy phase to the problem-solving phase, and you can do that often, particularly as a lawyer because you're trained to deal with the problems. So it's really interesting. I think those sort of skills are more at the forefront of modern practice than they've ever been in many ways.
Looking back, I think I was probably guilty of rushing to the problem-solving, not so much with members of the community who have been traumatised or had an experience, but even just with bureaucrats and wanting to get to a policy position. I want to get to the solve the problem and move on because there's all these other problems to solve. So I think just reflecting on that, I think I got better at that the longer I was in politics. But I think it is very natural for us to want to be very rational and get to the problem solving very quickly.
Well, I'm struck by the irony that I'm a mediator in circumstances where I think as a young man I was the most impatient person around. So patience is...
But it probably means you can understand a lot of the people that come before you because they're probably very impatient too.
Those that know me well say that I'm still impatient in various aspects of my life.
I am too. I think it comes with, that desire to change things for the better, like having that purpose. There's always so much to do. And I think particularly in politics, you're only there for a finite time. And if you've got this agenda and then you've got all of these other things coming at you, you do have to push hard. The process to get legislation from an idea to consultation to getting before the parliament is a long one. And it takes all of your energy to make it happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of perseverance in that game, isn't there? There's a hell of a lot of grit and perseverance. We're running out of time. It's been such a great conversation, but I want to talk about this. Politics is very much a winner takes it all, isn't it? And you've seen that close up now. So you've gone from 2015 being a junior minister straight away in a Labor government, and now you're obviously the shadow treasurer and in opposition. What's your reflections on that, Shannon, aside from how wonderful it is that now you're speaking to me in the resolution room because you've got this greater bandwidth? Is that a fair statement that, the winner does take it all? It's quite a transition to go from government to opposition. How's that been for you?
It's a huge transition, and I think I'm someone that got into politics because I want to do stuff. I want to change things. And so being in opposition, you don't have any real opportunity to do that. I mean, it's still a very important job. You're still holding the government to account. And in fact, some of the advocacy and the work we've done in that respect has meant that the government has changed, or what we say, backflipped on decisions. So you still feel like you've got a bit of purpose, but it's nowhere near the opportunity that you have when you're in government. And in Queensland, of course, we don't have an upper house. So if you have the numbers on the floor of the parliament, you have your agenda and you go for it. So it has been a big adjustment. For someone like me who was, used to just running hard and having all of that purpose, it has taken me a little while to adjust to what my role is now and how I can best find that purpose in this role, because it is a really important role.
I guess as well with any price, there's the upside, and I wonder if the upside is perhaps a bit more time and a bit more reflection time and personal time, perhaps. Have you
Yes.
noticed that?
Absolutely. Like I was very, 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 very busy before, as you can probably appreciate. And particularly as the health minister, I was very stressed. Like it's a very stressful portfolio.
It must feel like there's no winners in that space sometimes. It must feel like it's constant.
And there is so much great work that happens.
Yeah,
but
amazing
unfortunately, amazing work, amazing people, amazing researchers, brilliant people. But you're always drawn into that crisis end. And so even just waking up and having to read the paper, like you kind of feel a bit sick in your stomach. So that has been nice. To not have that level of stress has been nice. And I have had much more time for my family and, walking the dog and gardening. And I even had my first singing lesson last week, Damien. I actually have time
fantastic.
to do some enjoyable things for me. So
things that are just purpose about you, just about you, what you want to do. And
that's right.
And the time for friendships as well at times.
Absolutely. Spending time with friends and family, but also, as you said, time to think about things critically. And, I'm a reader. I've really enjoyed being able to spend some time thinking about issues and how I might do things differently if, I'm lucky enough to get back into government. And so it's been a good time for reflection and thinking. And as I said at the start, I love learning. So there's been time for that, which has been really nice.
That's fantastic. So where to from here, Shannon Fentiman? Keep being you?
Yeah, well, we're almost a year into opposition, so 3 more years to go, and I think the job has started to shift. Obviously, the LNP government have now been in power for a year, so they're starting to own some of the decisions that they're making. They don't necessarily get away with blaming the former government all the time. That's been a positive shift in terms of us being able to hold them to account. And obviously into the second and third year, we'll really be developing our policies to take to the next election. And policy development is what I love. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, that's amazing. Listen, thank you so much for coming on. As I said, the absolute high water mark of your media career, the resolution room.
Absolutely.
But in all seriousness, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your friendship over the years, Shannon. I hope to see a lot more of you, of course. And
Yes.
I hope our insights together are useful. So thanks again.
My pleasure, Damien. Thank you so much.
All the best.
You too.